Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished professional, a fellow YPOer from currently Cape Town, but otherwise Johannesburg, South Africa, Yogavelli Nambiar. Yogi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ashutosh, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yogi is the Chief Executive Officer of Allan Gray Orbis Foundation, which is identifying and nurturing entrepreneurial potential in young people. She's also the founding director of the Entrepreneurship Development Academy at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, which is GIBS. And as I mentioned in my introduction, she's a fellow member of the YPO. Yogi, what a pleasure it is to have you on my show. Before I get into talking about Allan Gray and your other passion of diversity and equity, tell me a little bit about your journey in brief.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was someone that was always interested in social justice and did various sort of projects when I was in school, always sort of fighting for the underdog in a sense, and started off my career working in communications, corporate communications in two big multinationals in South Africa. And then one day I made a trip to India, and it was just a holiday, was going to go for 3 weeks. And I went there and I saw this massive disparity between the rich and the poor, which might seem odd being from South Africa, one of the most unequal societies in the world. But it, because of apartheid, we lived in particular spaces. And I was from a township for people of Indian origin in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal. So everyone that I grew up with looked like me and were in the same kind of circumstances.
Right.
So I didn't really understand rich and poor in a sense and discrepancy. But when I went to India, I saw that and it really shook me. And I came back to South Africa. I resigned from my job and sold my house and car, and I moved to India in what I believed was going to be a mission to kind of change India around. And as a sort of 25, 26-year-old, I was going to sort out everything that all these other more adults hadn't thought about. And that sent me on a journey of really working in the human rights space, in social development, community development. I ran an organization for people with disabilities. I worked in the women's human rights sector, rescuing and mainstreaming women who had been trafficked into prostitution, really bringing awareness to human rights issues affecting women. And then after about 7 or 8 years, when India had slapped me around quite a bit and I kind of got a lot more realistic about social change, I came back to South Africa and I started applying the lessons I'd learned into social entrepreneurship, basically using the platform, the commercial vehicles that entrepreneurship offered into resolving or addressing social challenges.
Right.
From there, I ran my own businesses, both social businesses as well as mainstream commercial businesses. I've consulted, I've been part of writing the country's youth development strategy, consulted with the UN, writing sort of regulations in relation to women who'd been trafficked. Finally, all of these adventures brought me to creating a center for entrepreneurs to be developed at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. I created an academy there that breaks down the barriers to business school education for entrepreneurs. So irrespective of their affordability or accessibility, level of education, etc., that they could get business school education. And I ran that for 5 years, along with running the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women Initiative, which is a women entrepreneur program. And from there was approached to run the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation, which, as you say, identifies and nurtures entrepreneurial potential in young people. So that's kind of the snapshot.
Fantastic. And what an amazing journey. And someday I must do a separate conversation with you about your 8 years in India. But that's for another day.
Yeah, that was an eye-opener, definitely.
Absolutely. So tell me, Yogi, let's talk now about the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation. And you say you're supporting, nurturing entrepreneurs. What are some of the challenges a lot of potential startup entrepreneurs face in South Africa or Africa?
Yeah. So I think, there's several challenges, right? From, the education piece. So getting access to entrepreneurship education, even though some of that sounds so logical that we would teach our young people this, it isn't widely available in schools.
Okay.
And so you don't grow up with that knowledge or that lens on the world, that I can be entrepreneurial, that's an option open to me. And it's not viewed as something that one, is proud to show off, like that I'm an entrepreneur. Actually, the route to success is seen as being a CEO of a company.
Correct.
Or, it's sort of the doctor, lawyer, engineer type of thing. So entrepreneurship from a societal perspective is firstly not promoted. There's a lot of fear around it. The idea of failure is not as sort of encouraged as it might be in Israel, for example, where, that's seen as part of the journey. And so it's very encouraging to startup entrepreneurs. There's also something that we call the black tax. And that's basically, when you reach success at this stage, generally you're the first person in your family to maybe get a degree.
Right.
And you now, and out of the young people that we support, these are brilliant young people. They get snapped up by big corporates and they're earning a good salary. They now have the tax of supporting all the family members and the relatives that supported them in coming to this position. And so it, when you're earning, it's not like your salary is yours alone. You now have to support others. So taking the risk of starting a business and putting that income in danger is a very difficult decision to make, because you now have to, your family supported you to get to this point. You finally have a degree, you're now working, you're getting a salary that others in your hometown could only dream about.
Correct.
So now there's an expectation. So that's a very difficult thing. And then I think from a macro perspective, South Africa, and I think generally in Africa, but in South Africa, there isn't really an enabling environment for business. A few years ago, there was a study that was released where entrepreneurs call the environment hostile. And it's because there are so many disabling factors. For example, the amount of red tape and legislation that impacts on startup and small businesses, is the same kind of requirement that is required of big businesses. So it becomes difficult, for example, labor legislation. It becomes difficult for you to hire and fire someone because of, how expensive it is and because of all the regulation. So you can't be agile as a business. And it becomes something that's disabling. There's not a huge angel investing kind of market and space. So again, you don't get a lot of support in terms of from a financing perspective. Accessing markets is difficult. So there's And then, as I said, in the interplay with the fact that society doesn't actually promote entrepreneurship as a viable kind of career option. So it's very difficult for young people to be excited about entrepreneurship.
Very, very interesting. And, since you've come to India and spent time here, even in India, where I believe it's got a strong entrepreneurial culture, the first preference of most parents in the smaller cities is a government job.
Yeah. Because it's stability and security, and it's saying, almost even if it's not said sort of as openly, but it's like a justification of the investment we put in this young person, right? Time, effort, money, etc. And this person then presents almost like our hope of a better future.
Absolutely.
And now they want to go and dabble in this entrepreneurship thing. But that said, I remember in India, and I'm not sure if this is the case, but having listened to just the conversation in some classrooms in Bangalore was almost this, that there was a bit of pride in starting your own business. Like, and young people that I saw were not just looking for pocket money. They were looking at how can they, almost have a hustle that where they could kind of create a way to make their own money. I like that kind of sense of, that entrepreneurial mindset, which is what we're trying to inculcate.
Well said. My next question to you, Yogi, is that based on all the people that you have interacted with as entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, what do you think are the top 3 reasons why startup entrepreneurs don't make it?
Yeah, sure. I think there's quite a few reasons, and one I'll maybe start with the individual, and that is getting the mindset right.
Yeah.
I think if you're looking at entrepreneurship as a way of making a quick buck, if you're looking at entrepreneurship as being a solve all for your problems, or as a quick survivalist thing that you're doing, you're not working on the mindset that it takes to run a business and grow a business in the long term. You're looking at like quick fixes. And as we know with most things, like quick fixes just don't work, because when the world implodes around you, as it will sometimes, no one knew that COVID and all of this was going to happen. So when there are major disruptions, you don't have the wherewithal internally to manage those changes. Because from a mindset piece, you actually have not worked out why you're doing what you're doing. You don't have a strong sense of purpose.
Right.
And I know that's almost become cliched now to talk about purpose. But if you don't have that sustains you in those stressful and difficult times, you'll almost like easily fall apart. The other thing is this, I see a lot of startup entrepreneurs not properly understanding their market. They think up ideas, but they haven't stress tested it. They don't actually talk to their market. They imagine what they might need. I've even had a young person tell me when I was at Gibbs, tell me that their mother loves the idea, and that's why they thought it would work. But I was saying to them, they need to find like thousands of their mom then in the market and have that demand for their product. But they're in love with the idea, not with the problem they're trying to solve. And so what happens is, as I said, either they haven't stress tested it, or there's no market, or the market is asking for something else, or they, maybe there is a market, but the idea itself is the wrong one. And if you're so in love with the idea, you're not ready to like pivot into something else, because you're like, I must just make more people love my idea. And then I think the final thing is that they don't reach out for help.
Mm.
And I've done this myself when I ran my businesses. This almost the sense of like, I've got to do it all myself.
Yeah.
And if I don't, I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And I must know all the answers. And I think that's also partly because we put the wrong role models in front of young people. So it's almost this idea of Zuckerberg tinkering around in his garage, and then like he just created this thing and it became amazingly popular and he was successful. And then millions and billions later, he's the Zuckerberg we know. So there isn't that sense of, but what was the journey to get to that? What were the failures in between? What was the process he needed to follow? Who are the people he needed to reach out to? What is the, like we don't tell stories that create value for young people to learn from. We create values of sanitized success. You know that it reminds me of, is it Gary Player who said, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yep.
So people only see the luck part, and it's like they don't know what's going into creating the luck.
Well said. In fact, I was speaking to one of the founders of a unicorn, and she actually told me, she says, nobody thinks of the incredible work that has gone behind for the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why there's no such thing as an overnight success, right? Like it's because behind that overnight success was like 10 years, 15 years of hard work building to that point. And I think there's a danger with young people and the generational move towards quick fixes, quick success, jumping, especially when you're brilliant young people, your career trajectory is much quicker. So, in terms of however many years it might have taken me to get to be a CEO of an organization versus a person in a younger generation is now far different. But what you miss out on then is that almost those emotional intelligence lessons that goes in between, and understanding that good things come with hard work, and being able to reach out and ask for help when you need it.
Wonderful. So, let me talk a little bit to you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that you also lead YPO Africa Regional Board's DEI initiative, but this has nothing to do with YPO. Let me start by asking you that, based on all your experience, what, in your opinion, are some of the major inequities that are being faced by women and other minority leaders in the world?
Yeah, I think this is such an important area of work for all of us. And I think there's a couple of things, right? There's presence. There's actually being invited into the room, getting a spot at the table. So even before you become a leader, it's that run-up. And all the inequities that lead you to not starting from the same point. So from, I saw a couple of years ago, one of these like Facebook memes of trying to explain sort of discrimination or inequities. And it's basically like, you start lining up for a race and you're all at different sort of points. And so you're already starting with so many barriers. And that's what the lead up to becoming a leader looks like. It's inequities through the system, education, societal, it might be in your family sort of upbringing, it may be privilege or the lack thereof, etc. So all of that. So even being invited into the room, and then once you're in the room, getting a spot at the table is already difficult. So presence and just the diversity of the room that you're trying to be invited into is already an issue.
Very interesting.
The other is participation. So once you get into the room, the actual inclusion, not just being a number, because
Yep.
I can't tell you the number of experiences, not just that I've had, but other women, I mean, that I'm speaking to on a daily basis. The number of situations that they face where they're talked over, talked around, you know, having to navigate stereotypes, the layers of people's biases. Some that are conscious, but many that are even unconscious biases. And you know, so there's all of these things you're navigating to be part of the conversation. So the first part is getting into the room. The second is being part of the conversation. And there are all those, you know, around being part of the conversation. There's so many issues around this because, for example, there are so many studies that show that women leaders are termed aggressive, are termed bullies if they show the least bit of assertiveness. In fact, one study actually showed, I think, that 80 to 85% of women had experienced at some point in their career being called any or all of those terms compared to 25% of men.
Wow.
So there's these double standards you're dealing with. Again, there's all that societal stuff, which is not always visible to people who are perpetrating the stuff.
Correct.
You know, so there's all of that. Then there's the technical side around, like things like, you know, well, I say technical, maybe more practical side around like a pay gap, you know, and women. I mean, this is in almost all industries, right? And we've heard it being discussed in sport, for example. I mean, we were very excited that our women's national team, who get like barely any airtime from a societal talk perspective even, they went on to win the African Women's Cup of Nations, which is like a massive sort of soccer tournament and all of that. We're all excited and we're cheering them on. And then we heard that they get paid peanuts for, you know, for having done the same, you know, it's not like there's any concession in a goal in a soccer match for women compared to men. They're having to train, they beat all the teams that the men's soccer team would have had to. But, you know, so it's so prevalent that it's almost become accepted. And then in the midst of all of that, women are dealing with societal biases, with skewed levels of responsibilities in the home. And there's a balancing factor of the community as well. I'm going to just give you just a small interesting story in a study that I did on women entrepreneurs in townships, right? So, you know, the township very much like almost like a Brazilian favela slum type of area. And I did a study in 8 townships in South Africa on the psychosocial challenges faced by women entrepreneurs in these townships. And they found that if they started businesses, which was already discouraged, but if they got to a certain level of success, they were tolerated and even in good cases, even supported within the township. But if they reached just a certain level of success over that invisible line created by the community acts with what I call an invisible hand to pull them back down. They will stop supporting them. They face domestic violence at home. They have sort of, you know, on the light side, gossiping and societal discrimination that they face. And then on the really, as I said, on the extreme side, also like violence. And so the community acts in this way to bring you down to size, so to speak. So women leaders are facing a number of barriers and inequities. And I would venture to say, if I look at race, if I look at sexual orientation, if I look at other cultural sort of factors, It's similar for other minorities as well.
Agree. I agree with you. Well said. So Yogi, have time for one more question. And this is a question for all the viewers and listeners who will listen to your amazing thoughts. Based on your journey as someone who's supported entrepreneurs and someone who's so vocal about equity and inclusion, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to distill into 3 lessons. I feel like I can talk for days on this
I agree.
stuff. But I think on the entrepreneurship side, like I'd given a TEDx talk about this in 2020, which was entitled "Entrepreneurship Education is a Human Right." Everybody, in any circumstance, in any environment, the best thing that they can do for their kids is to help them or encourage them to think differently. And when I say to think differently, it's to think entrepreneurially, to think critically, to look at situations with curiosity, to be able to ask questions around problems that they see, and to be able to distill what are the opportunities that are available for me to address this problem. And to be able to think then creatively around a solution, whatever your resources are, because entrepreneurship is really about solving a problem with constrained resources, right? Every resource is constrained in the world. So whatever your constraint is, how do we enable young people to think entrepreneurially, to understand that they can learn and grow and impact on a situation, that they have agency, and that when they solve a problem that they care about, when they ask those questions about how can this problem be solved, they will find an entrepreneurial solution. So the first thing I think is that entrepreneurship education in whatever form, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, it must be shared openly, and it must be seen as a human right, because that's what's going to propel us and propel the next generation to impact on the future. The second thing is inclusion is everyone's problem. We need to rise it up to be part of the conversation. You know, if you're going to take up space in the world, you have a responsibility to ensure that you're not entitled to any more of it than anyone else.
Correct.
If you know, I always say my legacy will be that one person has breathed easier because I've lived.
Well said.
And if each person can be responsible in a sense for one other person, to be able to bring them into the conversation, to ensure that they're represented, to be able to fight that fight, to not say, oh, I'm comfortable, I'm secure. It's like I'm fighting my own fight, each person for themselves. You know, and you know that the African concept of Ubuntu, that I am because you are. You know, I am a person because of you. And so I think that our humanity is so entwined, and if we can really look at inclusion as that if I don't allow you to be and encourage and support you being included, then my humanity is diminished. And the third thing is ask for help. We are all going through tough times. There are mental challenges, mental health challenges being faced by people from whether it be from a diversity and inclusion perspective, whether it be entrepreneurs who are trying to do great things in the world. Everyone is struggling with something, so be kind and reach out and help.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yogi, on that note and your 3 amazing lessons, think differently. Everyone must think entrepreneurially. Inclusion is everyone's problem, or inclusion is everyone's opportunity. And the third one is ask for help. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your amazing journey, about, you know, the time you spent in India and some of your learnings, which maybe I'll ask you for some other time to discuss separately. Thank you for talking to me about the amazing work the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation is doing to support, identify, nurture entrepreneurs in South Africa and other parts of the world. And finally, thank you so much for giving me your thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.